Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Uniform with the LT's daughter. Today, my guest is Donn Bradley, who has a very interesting story, and I can't wait to dive in. Donn, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Catherine. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Okay, first, I want to kind of start off a little bit about you and your background. Why did you decide to get into law enforcement to begin with?
Well, I didn't really have an influence per se in the career itself. There wasn't, and usually it's one of three things. You either have people in your family that do it, something bad happened to you, you want to fix, or something good happened to you that you want to emulate, right? And so for me, that was not it was none of that because I just knew I wanted to help people. I was an old soul growing up, which meant that I liked talking to adults more than the people my friends and stuff. So getting into that was just driven by the fact that working in an office, I didn't want to. I basically said I want to help people and I don't want to die in a cubicle.
Fair enough.
So
And so I mean, did you like look into different professions or like how did you land on law enforcement though?
well, it because it became I kind of said to myself, what is it that I actually want to do in my daily work? And the thing just sort of popped in there. Well, I want to be a hero. What does that mean?
There you
All
go.
right. When you're raised with that, uh, be a man, right?
Hmm.
Men don't cry, emotions are weakness type of mentality. You basically go, what's the manliest thing I can do? Well,
Yeah.
be a hero, of course, right? I don't say that mockingly. I think there's a lot of people that do that same thing, but that's the really soft part of what the answer that they'll give you.
Yeah. So in your whole family, no one else is a cop or has anyone become a cop
No,
since you?
no, no. And
Wow,
I'd
that's
tell
so
everybody that
funny.
talked to me, don't do it,
Yeah. Wow.
right?
That's definitely a different take, I think.
Well, it
Like
was
a lot of
I definitely
times.
you get kind of I got up in there far enough to know that a lot of shit goes on and that it has this effect, right? So I have the was got a degree in psychology before I even started, not really thinking that I was actually going to do anything with. I just knew I was like, I don't want to sit and listen to people's problems all day. And now what do? I sit and listen to people's problems all day.
So
But it's
actually,
different.
yeah, definitely. And I that's actually really interesting to me because I knew obviously that you're a therapist now, but I didn't know that you got a psych degree before getting into law enforcement. And I talk a lot about my dad and about his experience as a cop, and he also had a psych degree going into the profession. And he also did it without like not because someone else was a cop, not because he wanted to save people. He just became a cop because he needed a job. And he got his degree in psych, and this is like I'm talking the 70s and 80s. So that field was actually taking a nosedive, and the he was working at like a mental health facility, and it closed down because they were closing them all down. And so he needed a job, and his older brother happened to become a cop, and it was a good job. It had good benefits. And so my dad was like, "All right, sign me up. It'll pay the bills
Sure,
and
why not?
it'll afford my family the life that we need." And so that's kind of why he became a cop. And we always talk about how I think that his perspective going into it afforded him and us a certain type of positive experience where he was really able to keep the two worlds pretty separate. Do you
Mm,
think that, and also he became a cop at 31, so I think like life experience and maturity and
sure,
stuff like that. Do
sure.
you think that your mindset going into it and your prior experience before getting into it, do you think any of that kind of helped you navigate different elements of the career?
I mean, having a sense of sort of psychological awareness. I mean, I don't mean to, but going into those classes and kind of having to look at that stuff and really feeling a kinship for it. The only thing I could say is that sort of helped me be able to break away from it now because at the time, you're steeped in this do the toughest thing, be the manliest man that you can, right? Not really thinking about the whole I wasn't even considering the whole mental health aspect of it. That
Mm,
was not even that
mhm.
was, and not to mention the fact that, raised with this men don't cry attitude, and then going into a job where you see these terrible things
Mm.
and have to just keep it in the box, right? Because it's the worst part of that person's world, and for you it's a Tuesday.
Yeah.
You're basically just going, okay, I'm really good at just stuffing it down.
Constantly pushing it down. Yeah. And do you like to that same effect? Obviously, at the time, you weren't considering therapy, it sounds like. But as you look back, if someone had suggested therapy to you when you were in the thick of your law enforcement career, how do you think you would have responded?
I would have. I think it would have been of two brains of that. I know way back in this part
Mhm.
that's what needs to happen, and that would help. But
Yeah.
then the very front part is the place that I live. I'm around a bunch of people, that giving off that same vibe, and so you feel this sort of tension to sort of stay within the group and feel shame whenever you have to do something that has been labeled as bad in this arena. I'm like, yeah, come over here. I agree with you. I just can't admit it in front of the guys here.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So, what do you think like shifted that made you decide, okay, now I'm going to go into a career as a therapist?
Oh, it was hands down the misery with which I had to deal going through the last part of being a police officer and then transitioning over, because I was there a lot of very interesting things happened, and it kind of changed things, and then I had to admit to myself things that I didn't want to admit to myself, that I was had a problem with pills and with booze and with weed, with all that stuff, and really got tied up in the injury and all of the things that I wasn't, all the stuff that was basically being stacked in there that wasn't being processed, was not being forgotten. So it just kept, and until it all finally just blew up. And then once it blew up, when I came up out of the ashes of it, I was like, oh yeah, I got to do something about this. This was because I didn't want to admit that I had a problem, and I was telling everybody else I was fine, and I was telling the people at work I was fine, and until it just blew up, and I couldn't even, when I was coming to work drunk, that was, that's, it wasn't like I all of a sudden snapped out of it. There was just sort of like a, what the hell did I do? You go through this horrible inventory of the terrible things you think you've done and that you are, and all this stuff that's sort of just mired in there, and then go, shit, I got to deal with this. I got to deal with this. I have to do something with it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, this is it. This is the legacy of my life.
Yeah. I love that you use the word legacy. I always talk about legacy. And so through that experience, was it like, okay, now I'm going to seek the help that I may or may not want, but clearly need. And then from
Yes.
there, saw the value and decided that you wanted to go down that route?
Well, so the bitterness that I had towards the end, because I did the whole anti-terrorism thing, right? And the one class that stuck with me every day is the whole advanced interview and interrogation, where they read facial expressions and body language and stuff like that. As a therapist, I use it all the time, and I use it as a means with which to sort of enhance that connection. Um, but what I and so having that skill and then going into a therapist who has no idea what they're in for, right? If I start you and you start telling the story and telling the story and telling the story, and you can tell. I mean, Stevie Wonder could tell that somebody's recoiling in horror at some of the stuff that you're trying to get off your chest, right?
Mhm.
And so it seems almost careless to give that to somebody when you know that it's distressing them so much that it was like, well, I got a stack of 1,000 more back here.
Yeah, it's almost like it makes it even worse because it's like, wow, this person is struggling to listen to what I'm sharing with them.
Well, so they say that you can keep like 7 different things going on in your consciousness at one time, right? If you've got somebody in there who's trying to sort of give you this thing to teach you, to listen to you, to be empathetic to your situation, giving them all that stuff and then expecting them to remember this script that they're going to go through is really tough, right? So my focus has always been on just making sure that first connection is made.
Yeah.
After that, it's not easy, but it's a lot easier if you were basically just doing person one talks, person two talks, right? Because a lot of people don't know how to listen.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it sounds like was your first venture into seeing a therapist with someone who wasn't necessarily culturally competent?
There wasn't. I have. There are very rare few people who are culturally competent in this particular area, right? And the ones that are, their schedules are so filled. It's right because basically I tell the people I talk with, I say you can lie all you want, you're just not doing it to me. Our point is to get from A to B. That seems to be that's not only is that the type of person I am, but the clients with which I speak, especially the first responder ones are the ones that basically go, just tell me what's wrong. Let's get in there and get it taken care of. It's a little more complicated than that, but they just want to go from A to B. So,
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely a need for more culturally competent therapists in this space.
oh, for sure. I encourage every first responder that I feel like got that. I'm basically evaluating and saying you should consider doing this because there's such a tremendous need, and it's going in the wrong direction. To be perfectly honest.
Yeah, I can imagine. So what was your transition like from being in law enforcement into being a therapist? I mean, for one thing, it's not a very law enforcement friendly field a lot of times.
That is
Um,
it. That is the understatement of the year right there.
just trying to be,
You're being very diplomatic. Yes, I
yes,
completely
exactly.
understand.
Um, but but also it's like two opposite sides of a coin. That's a really big career change for you to be making.
Sure,
So what was that
sure.
transition like?
Well, so when I first got done, I started doing some acting stuff. It was actually pretty
Oh,
hilarious, you know, thinking I was going to be this big star and all. Uh,
Vin Diesel.
yeah, yes, yeah. Then dump truck is more like it, but it would be. I started doing that a little bit. That was kind of cool and whatever. It wasn't until I actually got to. I was going to go back to school, just kind of like, yeah, see what I can do, right? And as soon as I opened up the book and all the stuff, and I'm like, wait a minute, I can take what the education that I already have, the experience that I've had, and the negative experience I've had. I can take the pain that came from that. I can add it to this school and can produce it. And the light bulb went off, and it was like, oh yeah, of course that's what I. And every day, there have been some really terrible days,
Mhm.
but every day is proof that it's what I was put on the planet to do. There's no question. All that other stuff was practice.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm
Yeah.
actually kind of curious, if you don't mind me asking, how old were you when you moved
When I
into the new career?
You mean when I first started law enforcement, I was 28,
Okay.
right? And then the therapy stuff started about 7 years ago,
Oh, cool. Okay. And
right?
how long was the additional education you had to do? I'm just curious because you have like you started law enforcement a little bit older, and then you also had two like very solid careers. And I think a lot of times people don't think they can do that, whether they're in law enforcement or anything, they think that they don't have enough time to fit in multiple career ventures. And so I'm
Sure.
curious to learn a little bit more about that because I think that's really interesting.
Well, it's funny you say that because I do a fair amount of I say career counseling. It sounds like high school comical, but it's what I the approach that I had, the thing that I'm schlepping, as it were. But I want to go on record. If you could zoom my face out of this, this is about the message, not the messenger, right? So, but I realized a long time ago that I had to sort of take ownership and put a name to it, right? And it seemed to resonate with folks. But I digress. Um, the thing that I'm trying to sort of tell folks is the thing that I had to do myself, and then ultimately it's about realizing that I was doing it wrong the first time. The method with which I chose to find the thing that I was going for was very sort of like flip a coin, spin around in circles, and see which direction you go into, right? And so this next time I was thinking, okay, what do I got to do? Well, I got to do it from the inside out rather than the outside in, right? You grow up, you see somebody, they're successful, they appear to be successful from the outside, right? And you go, I want to be that because that's what I think success is, right? And you get that message. Well, I had to go to the inside out and go, okay, what does it mean if I'm actually if I have purpose, like trying to build it from there and say, it's there's a Japanese word called ikigai, Ikigai, and it's basically it put simply, it's the meaning of your life. But my ikigai is the meaning of my life, right? And so they ask 4 questions, or they ask you to fill out the list of four lists: what you love, what you're good at, what you can be paid for, and what the world needs. And on somewhere on all four of those lists is going to be the one thing you were put on the planet to do. And so you owe it to yourself to find out the type of person that you are. And if that includes the experiences that you had from this previous career. So I just tell them, I kind of put it in that way, explain it to them. It's like, well, yeah, of course you got a chance, because this isn't like, oh, check, well, either success or failure and move that back. No, this is the stuff that fuels what you're doing up here,
Yeah.
right? Because the thing I'm doing is basically comes from wanting to fix the person that got broke back then.
Yeah, very well said. Okay, so when we initially connected, it was about a metaphor and an analogy that you have kind of coined. So before we get into anything else, I want to kind of give you the floor so that you can share what exactly that is and explain it.
Oh, okay. So in addition to the introduction that I normally do about myself, the reason I do that is because I want to sort of validate what it is that I'm saying, right? It's for me, this stuff isn't, I call it the new mission, but it's not new. I'm not coming up with it. Just came up with a way that the people, and this is in everybody's first session, right? This is sort of the format for everybody's first session, because we've got to make sure that we're starting in the right place, right? And so I tell them I use a lot of analogy and metaphor, and I say that because I'm trying to get you to get a picture in your head, your picture in your head, and then attach this little message next to it. And every time you think of that picture, you're going to see that message, and it's going to kind of drill this sort of sense of awareness and motivation deep down. That's basically what it comes down to. But it's also about making sure that you're trying to empower you a little bit to get over that first hump, just to get started, right? And that first hump is the one that got all that stuff kind of mired down in there that says that men don't cry, especially in public. You feel bad when you do it, like that whole stigma thing, right? And so this is basically about sort of overcoming that, and basically realizing that you are what everybody else is, and that is a human being. And that's the hard. I realize, there's people who are going, oh, here we go again, a touchy feely crap, right? I don't like that stuff either, right? But I have to sort of paint a picture and simplify it, because I'm sneaking past a lot of defenses, right? If some comes and listens to this podcast, they're gonna go, yeah, whatever, and I'm basically telling you why they're saying whatever, right? So I try to simplify it, very Sesame Street style, right? Okay. So, and what I'll tell you is, so this is your brain right here. This is your brain. This is my brain. This is the brain of every person standing on this grain of sand, hurtling through space, right? I think it's going to come as no shock. I'm not a scientist. Okay. I'm trying to simplify this in the best way. If this is my brain, then this is that first little peanut that I got whenever I was first born. It's the foundation of my survival, right? The whole fight, flight, faint, or freeze thing. First responders, it's only fight, 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 or fight. There is no other option, right? They drill that down into it. This thing is like a container, and you're given this container like right when you're born. And whether you have good parents, bad parents, no parents, love and support, abuse and neglect, or a laundry list of trauma, it dictates how big this container is and how often you're allowed to pour it out, right? Then we get older and we develop our higher functions, logic, reasoning, stuff like that. But tucked way deep into the core of this thing is foundation of your survival. Fight, 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 or fight. Okay. Well, I ask everybody I talk with, I'm like, have you ever gotten really mad when and done something really stupid and then come back and thought, oh gosh, what did I do that for? God, I can't believe I did that. Well, that's this portion of your brain casting judgment on this portion of your brain for doing the only thing it knows how to do, and that's react, right? This thing doesn't, it doesn't have eyeballs, doesn't have ears, doesn't ruminate, contemplate, investigate. It basically just reacts, right? Your brain sees it. Next thing you know, you're going, oh, crap. Something happens, click, this turns on, right? The reason that the military guys and the police guys train over and over and over and over again is because they need a survival script for when this thing turns on, because all of this turns off, right? You think about that, it's like, oh, okay, well, that makes a lot more sense. And so we go to this container and we've put all this stuff into it. And I mean, we are just slamming it in there. And when the container's halfway, you're like, oh, whatever. This is going to last forever. Ha ha ha. For your container getting full or whatever, right? And feeling that sense of guilt and shame. It's like, no, it's a little bit more different than that, right? And the reason I use the pictures is because when people get the picture in their head, they're going to go, oh, okay, yeah, that totally makes sense. And a lot of the response is, wow, I've never thought about it like that before. And it's like, okay, great. That's completely normal. That's good. Part about this one is that it takes the container and kind of tilts it a little bit and makes it not quite fit the way it used to, right? And it can have this sort of rebound effect. I so much so I've had clients come in, I kind of laid that out there for them, and then I'd never see them again, right? And that was because what we kind of opened it up a little bit too much, and it kind of, because what happens is it reveals that there's a lot of things that you have a little bit more control than you realize, but that the thing that you're trying to control, you're trying to do all at once, and that's not how it works, right?
Mhm.
So, have you ever been to the fair, like the county fair or anything like that?
Definitely.
Okay. What do you think of whenever you think of the county fair?
I think of kind of chaos and lots of screaming children and
Sure.
loud noises
Rides,
and
funnel case, corn dogs,
bright
games, all
stuff.
that stuff,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
Fried food.
You probably, if you took a breath right now, you think of some smell that would
Oh
shoot
yeah.
into your brain, right? Okay. Do you remember those games in the middle that go down the midway, that the ones where the horses are racing each other,
Yeah.
right? Okay. Think about that. Every person on the planet, and like I said, this is who you are before you're anything else. Your foundation, who you are, your humanity, right? Every person on the planet gets four horses. It's four horses is the team that's responsible for pulling your life. Well, now, whether it's pulling your life or pulling SEAL Team Six's life, it doesn't matter about your physical external strength. This is the part that is the inside that is basically filling up as your outside sort of protects it, puts the shields up for it, right? But every person has four horses, right? There's the physical horse. That's basically the container that you came in, right? Whether you're tall or short, wide or thin, sick all the time, a gym bro, it's the spectrum on which everybody falls, right? It's the wide range of humanity. Okay. Then there's the physical horse. I'm sorry, the intellectual horse. That's book smart versus street smart, somewhere in between, a little bit of both, right? The social horse. That's the loner versus the cool kid in the group, right? Somewhere in between, a little bit of both. Then there's the emotional horse. All right, we'll get back to that one. Bang, the gun goes off, your life starts. You go out, you're trying to figure out, are you going to be an athlete? Are you going to be a brainiac? Are you going to be a social butterfly? Nobody wants to be the emotional one. Even, as history has shown that between men and women, women are typically more emotional in that way, but even they don't want to be labeled as emotional because it's like a bad thing, right? Guys, for sure. Okay. So this one goes back behind. They basically say, you know what? Maybe you get a chance to come out when you're first born. Maybe. But then something happens. You get made fun of or something, and this horse goes, okay, I see society's basically telling me that men don't cry. And I'm describing my situation. Men don't cry, you're not allowed to do this. Okay, that's fine. We're going to shame it back here. We're going to lock it behind the gate, right? And when things get difficult, you're going to figure out how to deal with things. And these different ways. I'm going to fight. I'm going to work overtime. I'm going to work out, right? That's what physical way. Intellectually, what I'm going to do. It's called intellectualization. It's basically how many guys you know that can solve everybody else's problems but their own. They're like, I can do this. You do this, and I've got the perfect plan. And
Hmm.
right, I'm doing it too, right? So that's the thing is that's just the logical part of your brain. Sorry, I didn't mean to hold that up there like that. The logical part of your brain that is trying to keep the other stuff from being dealt with, right? Socially, what do we do? Well, first responders, it's a choir practice, right? Hey, I just went on this terrible call and I got this really, I mean, it really messed me up, right? But I'm sitting there and it's like trying to hold a rabid monkey, you know. It's you're freaking out on the inside, but exterior, you're just, yeah, I'm fine. You know, I'm doing all that kind of stuff. You go and you hang out with your pals after work, and you say, yeah, it was some call, huh? It's like, it was nothing. And then that thing just gets stamped down into you. Go, you mean to tell me that this thing that I feel is I'm it must be because there's something wrong with me? Oh, I'm the bad guy because this thing that I had made no assessment on is was judged by the outside of somebody else. That didn't really make sense, right? And so trying to so as you realize that these three, I'm sorry, I keep doing that. Let me turn
Hmm.
this like this, can we do it like that? Okay.
Yeah.
So this one gets locked behind the gate. These three are basically become like thoroughbreds. They're the ones that just are galloping through your life. This is how they were taking care of me, right? But little did I know that I was stacking up the container I told you about was basically stacking up in the lane of the emotional horse, saying, it's not going anywhere. We're not forgetting it. We're just waiting until you decide to deal with it. Right. And it becomes this Mount Everest pile of shit. And most people, I was able to kind of see that there was something going on. Right. But for anybody that basically gets this one locked behind the gate, they don't even want to look. They don't even want to know that there's a pile of crap out there that they eventually have to deal with, right? But that bill's coming due whether you like it or not. I've been unfortunately party to the end of people's lives, not the least of which was my mom's, and what I know about that is that that bill is coming due. So best to pay it early, right? What you realize is that when that Mount Everest pile of crap eventually just gets to be too much, something kicks this gate open. Now, mind you, like I said, these three are thoroughbreds. This one's going to come out and he's going to be a doe-eyed baby, the walking on stilts and going, I can't even lift up my own body. And then he looks up at that big Mount Everest pile of crap and goes, no, no, we can't do this. And because if you think about it, these three are bullies. These are the ones that basically going, don't do this, don't do this. Let's shame it back in there, right? Doing everything it can. How dare you? You should be ashamed of yourself. And the simple fact is, I'm the main reason that I'm doing this is because of all the posts I've heard about officers taking their lives. It breaks my heart. And I wish they would call me, right, and say, I can help you with this. I can help you understand this, right? But that doe-eyed baby comes out there and says, I can't do this. Well, there must not be any other options. And then they do something terrible, right? And that's not true. It's simply not true, right? So basically what happens is we wore out all of our different coping techniques. We filled up our container and now we're going, okay, well, what's left? And then you ask this underserved muscle to come out and lift this huge heavy weight. It's like, no, no. There's three things that have to happen in order for change to occur, right? To the intellectual, it makes total sense, makes you roll your eyes, and you're like, ugh, yeah, of course, right? But I'm not talking to this person. I'm talking to this person right here. Okay. You got to acknowledge that something's going on, right? If you've been depressed for 20 years, it's not who you are. You've been depressed for 20 years.
Hmm.
Number two, you have to accept the level to which that thing is truly negatively affecting your life, right? I only drink a little bit. Yeah, everybody else thinks you're an alcoholic, right? Till it changes in you, it ain't going to change. Third and most important, and this is, we talked about this, four is greater than two, the new mission thing that I was telling you about, right? The little bracelet I had.
Love that.
And that is the third one is you have to give yourself permission to act on your own behalf, right? That this one is not going to come out. I mean, you're going to get shamed, shamed. You're going to feel terrible for doing it. You have been who you are for such a long time that to think you're going to be in this other lane and try to deal with this stuff and all the bad negative stuff that goes along with it, right? The bad taste that people have in their mouth for therapists and the the having fear but not wanting to admit you have fear and the way they think it'll change them afterwards and all this kind of stuff, it hangs in there and it makes it really difficult for somebody to want to actually give permission for this little guy to come out because they have to, right? Have you ever seen anybody jump to the top of Mount Everest?
Never. Not
Of
possible.
course, right, right. Small steps and a guide. You have to give yourself permission to find a guide. That's really it's seems pretty simple to me, right? The reason that it becomes so overwhelming is because yes, I'm Mr. Cop. I've got to deal with all this stuff in here. Click. Next thing you know, this is Chicken Little. The sky's falling. It feels like you think about everything you got to do all at once. And I'm like, well, do you go into a gym and lift all the weight in the first exercise? No, you don't. You basically you're carving it out. You take control of it rather than it just basically steamrolling over the top of you because it will. It's going to.
Yeah. I love all those visuals. I'll definitely I put them on YouTube, but I don't usually promote YouTube, but I'm gonna tell anyone listening, I highly recommend watching this one on YouTube, just because there's a lot of visuals that Don was using in that explanation, and I think they were really helpful, and that was really profound, and I think that a lot of those analogies and metaphors that you used can help a lot of people maybe have something click. Um, the the stigma though is super strong. We all know that. So a lot of times people don't even want, especially first responders, they don't even want to take the first step to consider therapy. So how do you get people through the door? Like, how do you get people to open their minds a little bit to this idea of seeking help?
Well, I sort of lead with the idea that I tell them I see the people that don't have anything to do with it. The more anti-therapy you are, the better. I'm basically sort of saying, you opposed to therapy, you don't want to do this. You know what? You are exactly the person that I want to talk to, and I do it in such. I guess I'm saying it in such a way that makes them go, "What the hell is going on with this guy? What's the deal?" And then but like I said, I'm immediately honest with them, kind of telling them who I am, telling them there seems to be a lot of appeal to that because a lot of people do. Honestly, they do lie to themselves, and when you can see this thing and you see the way they respond, and you're paying attention on it, you can get in there. So I guess I'm not really, I don't market myself very well, but that's sort of intentional, right? The idea is I want to help as many people as I can face to face as I possibly can. But it's my selling point is other people talking about me, but also when I talk to people, it's basically I'm right up front. I tell you who I am, tell you it is what I do. I hear your story. I'm good at listening to, so I know how to respond in a way to let folks know that I'm listening. Which I think I don't see that as a difficult thing. I think that's just sort of respect you have for having a communication with somebody. But I understand communication at a little bit deeper level, and I try to basically let people in on it rather than because if you're upfront with kind of what you're doing and kind of what you're going at, and they still can't fight it, then it's like, then don't.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's the idea. Is we're basically we're not going head to head. We're going side to side. Right? It's the
Right.
Sherpa can't take you up the mountain. You're the one that's got to step. Right? I ain't gonna drag you up there.
Right. So it sounds like you kind of meet people where they're at and
Of
talk to them
course.
on their level. And that's definitely not the experience that you had when you first kind of ventured into therapy, it sounded like.
No.
So
No.
like how did you personally make the shift? Because obviously you didn't necessarily have the support of the therapy that you were seeking out initially. So how did you like work through that and get to a place where you could start to open up?
Well, it's so my scholastic experience was not very pleasant, right? Being uh, Caucasian Christian heterosexual male in the who represents law enforcement in the most liberal profession of the most liberal state in the union. I was definitely the bad guy, right? And so going through school, I basically told myself I was gonna be this vulnerable person at kind of whatever it needed to take. I needed to be this vulnerable person and let the stuff out and kind of and obviously deal with it, not only sort of for the scholastic process, but for my own process, right? And about halfway into the school process, uh, there was a class we had. Ironically, it was a cultural competence class, right? Which and I had a really bad experience with them where I was found out the hard way that the one of the cultures that wasn't represented was obviously law enforcement. It was the beginning of all the cancel culture stuff, and there was a presentation we're doing on the various cultures, and one of the presentations was on it was by two uh, Caucasian ladies doing a presentation on African Americans, right? You're basically trying to find out the culture you want to learn more about in the therapeutic setting, right? Made total sense. And there were a couple of the slides that were personally offensive to first responders, and the second one, I just kind of got up and I started to walk out because I was kind of getting, when you go through these cohorts, you go through with the same people in every class all the way through to the end, right? And so I wanted to, my goal was to not bring any of my negativity to try to negatively influence, right? And when I got upset, I was like, okay, this can't be the person. I can't have this represent me in the class right now. And so I got up and walked out. Teacher runs after me, asks me what I'm doing. I'm going, and I explained to him exactly what I explained to you, and then left. And when I came back the next week, I said, hey, I'd like to make a statement to the class and let them know. And I then told them everything that I just told you. I work with all these really good people across the spectrum. There is, everybody's accepted. And so for you to make this statement about first responders, what I thought was kind of disrespectful. The moment I stopped talking, you're a racist. We don't respect you anymore, all this kind of stuff. And I was like, did you guys hear what I said? And obviously they didn't. It was an older person with a class full of basically children. And so that one kind of set me sideways. We go about our day for that class, come back in the next week. I come in, I'm always first in the class. I'm sitting on one side. Everybody sits on the other side of the room. Nobody comes within 20 feet of me. And I was like, okay, that one really burned in me. Right. And so what I realized was, well, therapists in training, I had to laugh at that. That's
Yeah.
hilarious. But to have that experience, what I realized was it was at that moment I kind of said, well, wait a minute. We gotta if somebody's got to do it. Somebody's got to be able to create a spot for the people that see, hear, smell the worst things you can possibly imagine. And I hear stories that would make other therapists quit their jobs, right? Like after the first one, they'd be like, no, this ain't worth it. Right. But that's the thing is I know it's out there. It's got to be, somebody's got to have a spot for it. And so being able to sit and listen to some sufficiently terrible stories, it's really difficult, right? But going through that process, I was very sort of guarded then because I'd been vulnerable and they basically crushed me. That one hurt a lot. I'll be the first one to tell you that one hurt a lot. And so I'm kind of pulled it back and kept that wounded part of myself, didn't really interact with anybody for the rest of the time that I was there and couldn't wait to get out of there. Right. And so it's funny, you told your story. And then it reminded me of my scholastic story. We were supposed to, go to this internal practicum where they basically are teaching us how to be therapists, right? We get there, and within 30 days, the place closes and we have to go find external practicum somewhere. And I was like, this doesn't feel right. This was really difficult. And we had a hard time finding the training hours because it had to be during the school year. And so it started this sort of clunky scholastic thing that ultimately came out on the other side as wanting to be a place where somebody who didn't want to have anything to do with it could really go, I need somebody to listen to me. I need somebody to take this weight. It's like, okay, I get it. Right. Just a non-judgmental place. And I hate to use the cliche stuff because it really does sour me as well.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, cut the bullshit. You guys want to deal with something, don't pretend it's not there.
Yeah. Well, you could probably tell by my face. And again, if you're on YouTube, you saw my face. I was not expecting you to say that that was their reaction. I mean, I was on the same page. I knew where the whole story was kind of going, but for you to come back and share something so vulnerable and from your very lived, very real experience to a bunch of people who want to be therapists, I was expecting you to be like, they applauded me. They welcomed me with
No,
open arms. That did not, that took a turn that I was not expecting.
it definitely, I didn't want to admit that to them, but that hurt me a lot.
Yeah.
It was one of those things where I'm like, well, gosh, they're going to treat me like that in here. If they're going to treat somebody who represents what I represent like that in this place, what are they going to do out there? Well, it makes me think that if a first responder goes to one of these people,
Yep.
I'm going to be like, don't go to them. Don't go to them. And I would never obviously advertise something like that. But in my heart, I'm like, well, that's unfair. That's unfair for them. Not unfair for me. It's unfair for them to go there thinking that they're going to be sort of represented, not knowing that there's this slight little tint of the way they think about somebody that does that, right?
Yeah.
And so I get that. I've been on the other side going, I don't want to have anything to do with these people, right? And it was mostly because I didn't understand, mostly because the stigma and all that kind of stuff, right? But then getting dragged through that hellscape of school, coming out on the other side, I'm like, okay, yeah, I got to create a place where people can go, where people can actually say, yeah, I don't want to be here. I've had a fair amount of people go, it was either this or the gun.
Hmm.
And it's like, oh, okay, my goodness, please call me anytime when it gets to that. And that just what that and when I explain it to him, I'm like, look, the container that you thought was going to be there forever, it wasn't going to be there forever, and it's way completely full. Oh, and I get to do something about it? Okay, good, cool. That guy letting me know I can do something about it is one thing. Having that thing burn in your gut and not do anything about it and ignore it and tell everybody you're fine, it's a completely different thing. It's we prepare our whole entire life for that battle that comes from the outside in, right? But we don't prepare for the one that comes from the inside out. And when it gets too full, it's like you can't be surprised that it ends up happening that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, to your point about, those people going into the field and the way they received you as a classmate with the experience and the background that you have, it's like that's going behaviors and attitudes like that are going to perpetuate the problem because if a law enforcement officer or a first responder or military, whatever it is, goes to seek the help that he or she may not want to admit that they even need, and they end up with a therapist with a similar perspective, it's like that's just they're never going to go back. They're never going to seek the help that they were already didn't want to go after.
Sure. Well, and if you think about the therapist that I need to go see, knowing that that's the pool that I got to fish from, it's like, I can see why nobody reaches out to them, right?
Yeah.
And then having the added, and I can also tell when you're basically blowing sunshine up my ass.
Yeah, it's yikes. When you went into your schooling, did you know that you wanted to specialize in law enforcement and everything?
Well, I figured that that was, I mean, it seems kind of cliche that I would be doing that, but it just seemed, it had more to do with the idea that, well, I'm this type of person. How does the type of person that I am and the extension of the sort of therapy that I do, who would be the clientele most that, and frankly, it doesn't, I don't necessarily specialize in first responders. I do. I mean, I do, and I can, and I certainly know how to talk
Right.
and complex trauma, PTSI, all that kind of stuff. That's of course. But the thing is that I've noticed that this message, as it were, applies to everybody.
Mhm.
You
Of
know,
course.
kids are awesome. I have some awesome kid clients. I have some elderly people. It's all across the spectrum, couples, things like that. And so the thing is, it applies to everybody, and everybody appreciates the idea that it's like, we're going to cut past the crap. We're just
Mhm.
going to get to what's going on, take responsibility for what's ours, grab a hold of our steering wheel, and drive the direction we want to go. It sounds really simple, right? But it's kind of like IKEA instructions. The booklet looks small, but when you open it up and see 16 different languages, it's
Yikes.
a little harder to interpret.
Yeah. And I also think first responder, military or not, your approach is a welcomed approach by a lot of people, just because a lot of people don't want the sunshine and rainbows and the really curated um interview style conversations, or
Sure.
like the I don't know, just like what you kind of think of when you think of therapy. I know that that's not the kind of therapy that I would ever be receptive to. So I think, like you said, it really can benefit a whole heck of a lot of people outside of this industry. But I asked that question because did you have to do a presentation? And if so, was it on law enforcement
You mean in that
in
cultural
that
competence
class?
class?
Yeah.
I did mine actually on the Arabic community because when I was when I
Oh,
did the
yeah.
was a first responder. I did a Islamic culture. I taught an Islamic culture class because I was doing the whole anti-terrorism thing, you know, and I was going through this long list of education and stuff like that. So I basically wanted to after 9/11, I wanted to catch him myself, right?
Right. How was your presentation received?
I don't even remember honestly
Oh,
because
okay.
that thing happened in the
Fair enough.
beginning of it, and
Right.
it was after that I was just like
Checked out.
kind of
Yeah.
yeah, it really. I mean, I these folks don't realize how damaging it was and how hard that particular thing was to deal with.
Yeah. And honestly, it's scary to know that that's the field that they went into.
Well, I'd suspect that, you know, a lot of folks, one of the things I'd noticed is that people were sort of realizing in the realness of the actual therapy that it's harder than it looks, and that it's that you find out really if that's what you wanted to do, and that what you find out is that you were too young to realize that you didn't have the life experience to be able to apply to the thing that you wanted to do. And some, you know, folks have sort of floated off this way and floated off this
Mhm.
way, and but
Yeah.
we always lose some folks.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I have some more like specific tactical questions that I want to ask you before we wrap up. Um, I know as a therapist, obviously you can't give advice or you don't give advice, but as a former law enforcement officer, what advice would you give to any cops that are listening right now?
Well, what, are you speaking specifically about the mental health aspect of it?
Nope, just anything that you've learned along your way.
Well, I'll speak to the mental health aspect of it because
Sure.
this would be something that I'd want to put on my belt back at the time,
Something, yeah,
right?
something you wish you had been told, maybe.
Well, and I told you this one, and you've heard it before in the thing that I did before. I try to compare what it is that you're kind of holding up, what the thing it is that you feel like you signed up for, right? When you got into this job, you signed up for the tough work and the chases and the possibility, and you pumped up this idea of what you signed up for, right? But you don't have a crystal ball. You can't see into the future and know that you think that all of the mental health effects of the things that you see constantly day in and day out are you think they're just going to sort of like not even ever be there, but they're basically, like I said, you're going to be holding on to that for the whole entire time, right? So best to not start collecting these things, right? And lifting them up like, like rocks in the backpack that you've heard before. Because what you're trying to do is basically build in early that when something terrible happens, you can acknowledge the fact that it's terrible and that it was or had this effect, right? I've had a lot of people come in who've had the idea that they were going to die, like their brain said, "I believe I'm going to die," right? And so that stamp in your brain, you find out that people come in after that and they go, "Well, I'm more impulsive. I drink more. I do this," right? And it's basically because they believe they're playing on the house's money. Oh, I should have died back here, right? And what it is this structure that you thought that was never. So as a rookie, okay, I'd say to myself, look, you've built this structure that you think is going to be there. I'm not going to be afraid. I'm going to be able to fight. There's going to be this, there's always going to be a chance, and if I don't win, or not knowing any of the consequences of this, even if I don't win, I'm going to be a hero doing it, right? You've got this and it's strong, right? It's great. It's strong. And so I'd tell the person that didn't see anything yet, this structure is going to be there, right? But one day you're going to come across something that's going to scare the shit out of you, like literally you're going to think in your mind, "Oh shit, I'm dead," and there'll be this, and that's the idea that this just goes crack and just breaks it. That thing that you thought was going to be there forever cracks and breaks, shatters, right?
Yeah.
Part about that is this was unrealistic to begin with, right? Because there wasn't a proper inventory of it. You haven't had enough experience, all this kind of stuff. But it was the devastation of this thing breaking when you got to a level of fear you thought you never get to, right? And then it's like kind of like a jump scare, right? Have you ever seen the jump scare of the kid in the garbage can that jumps up and scares that kid and he reaches out and punches him in the face,
Oh, yeah.
right? There's three things that happen right there. There's shock, fear, and embarrassment, right? And that's why he responded back. It's like, I showed enough when I jumped and showed it on camera. He realized he showed more fear than he wanted to and went, "Oh, the only way a guy can do this is respond." Boom, pops him in the face, right? And so we don't want to show anybody that fear. We didn't want to admit it to ourselves. And when it breaks, right, then you go and then you start being more reckless with your life. You're like, "Well, this is extra," right? You got to go back in and kind of put the pieces of this back together, knowing that this thing had happened, that you'd been afraid and had this thing kind of shatter it, right? Well, that happens so many times, so many of those things, little stacks of fear, that when you get to the end of it and you do that inventory, you're like, "Oh no, that's too much fear for me to deal with." And you look all at all of it all at once. It's like, no, we gotta go through here, but we're not gonna. And that's the thing is, I don't want that direct style to suggest that direct style is careless or forceful or anything like that. It's really not. I care about the people that I speak with. I care about their space and the things that happen in there. But that doesn't mean that we can't get to the point,
Right.
right?
Absolutely. And on a similar note, I have a lot of spouses, law enforcement spouses who listen to the podcast, and they are obviously typically the main support system for the law enforcement officer to which they're married. So do you have any advice that you could give them as they support their officer?
Well, so this thing about communication that I talk about, right? Like I said, it applies to the husband and the wife, and this or the partner and the partner. Okay.
Mhm.
And so they both have these, right?
Yeah.
And this is the only place that you're communicating from, right? You're calm, your mainframe's online, we're having a conversation. Next thing you know, somebody says something about they threaten their manhood or something,
Yeah.
whatever. Click, right? You've stopped communicating at this point. This is not communication. This is not communication. This is two rams on a hillside. And so what you're trying to do is recognize when you're in this mindset, especially in relationships, right? You have to understand that you're not responsible for whether somebody else is freaking out. You're responsible whether you are, and you're trying to basically establish a dialogue that says that when I recognize I'm here, I'm going to do this. When I recognize I'm here, I'm going to do this. We're going, and we've agreed that this is the plan on which we are basing our love. We're saying, I love you so much. I want to learn how to communicate in a way that's basically not going to be us going. I get a lot of couples, and it's not, there's some tough conversations in there.
Hmm.
But the simple fact is, you go, well, let's find out how you guys are all intertangled and separate that. And you go, you take care of this, you take care of this. Then we'll come back and I'll translate for you. And you kind of just eventually get the communication that works. It's easy and hard at the same time. It's IKEA instructions.
Yeah, that's actually interesting because it's something that my husband and I started to do a while ago. I don't know how or why. He probably implemented it, but it's like essentially if we're having a conversation or even an argument, if it gets to a point where one of us gets triggered, then we say that essentially. We just say like, okay, that, hit a button or whatever. I need to take a step back or I need to pause this conversation and get my head level again. And then we come back together where we can have this conversation and like go back
Sure.
to actually having a productive conversation. So that was helpful for me. I'm like, oh, we're on the right path.
Good. Well, and the thing is, you gotta ask yourself in the calm times. You
Yeah.
have times where there are some tension or whatever.
Hmm.
You ask yourself in the calm times, which brain do I want to be represented by in this conflict, so to make sure that my message actually gets heard. And it's never this one,
Right. Yeah, definitely
right?
not. Hmm.
And so that's the idea, is just being able to sort of, you're basically saying that I'm removing myself from the area because I love you. You're just not saying it right then. You're
Hmm.
basically just going, all right, right? Because we agreed that this is the best way to bring both of the mainframes back online.
Yeah, I love that. That's really good. Again, watch the YouTube just to see the visuals demonstrated. Can you share this one's kind of a loaded question, but is there like one small tactical action that anyone listening can take to kind of move the needle forward if they're starting to feel like maybe they need to explore mental health or it has come up and they're not really open to it? Like, what is one small thing that someone can do to
Well, okay, so I would, the reason I made this bracelet, and I'm telling you this because I think there's this sort of keychain type of awareness, because all this is not so much therapy as it is self awareness and motivation. The idea is, can you see what the number says right there?
It's four is greater than two.
Four is greater than two, right? Mathematically, that's true, correct?
Hmm.
Right? We talked about the mission. We talked about the mission, right? When you get up into the cruising altitude of your life, you get into a spot where you are that person, right? I was that police officer, and I had this idea that mental health was not an option, or we did, whatever the men don't cry, emotions are weakness mentality. I was steeped in it. Had it full force, right? But if I had this, I'd send one of these back in the old DeLorean and say, here's the message I would put with it, right? You get up to the cruising altitude of your life, you're stuck where you're at, you feel like going to seek out this service, the service that I'm telling you now, the older version of you telling you now, uh, is for your life. It's for your survival. Listen to what I'm saying, right? And so hopefully my dumber self would have paid attention to that. But changing is really difficult, right? If I imagined at the time that the person who I'm telling this to, he's surrounded by a bunch of people that are like, oh yes, we're hard chargers, we go out and do things, right? A varying range of people who've been throughout their careers and stuff like that. And looking back on it now, I realize, okay, now I realize what I was seeing, the 1,000-yard stares and all that kind of stuff. But changing is really difficult, right? If you imagine going into your lineup, and I'm sure that people will hear this, and they go into their lineup and say, hey guys, I'm thinking about processing my feelings. Everybody would be like, well, what? Are you? And it would make you feel bad, right? I mean, obviously that's a little overstated, but you're gonna, if you shed a tear, it's the sense of guilt that something's changing, right? And so when I talk about this mission about being able to give yourself permission to kind of seek out these resources, it's doing so not when the container's like completely overflowing, right? Because then it really feels bad. Then it's really making you feel guilty, right? But you're gonna come to somebody like me, you're gonna come to somebody like that, and you're gonna be so caught up in your own process that it's gonna be really difficult to sort of get over that first hump. And to the person I'd say the first hump, hey, look, does it kind of feel like this? Is this the struggle you're going with? Right? Instead of sidling up beside them and saying, hey, I've had this experience. Does it sound kind of similar? Doing that type of thing and then going, okay, well, here's what I've learned about that. Right. And that's that whole give yourself permission idea. Right. And then when they say, well, what about that thing in my heart or that thing in my gut that makes me feel bad for seeking this stuff out, right? What about the disapproving looks of everybody else around me that make me feel bad for wanting to feel better, which is ironic, obviously.
Mhm.
They say, well, you have to remember that you're doing it for yourself, not to them, right? It's if they're uncomfortable, it's not because you're doing something wrong. It's because they're uncomfortable, right? You're trying to exercise a muscle that maybe they haven't gotten to yet. And so when you start exercising that muscle, it's going to feel awkward because you're going to be like, well, I'm the big strong man, but this is like just learning how to ride a bike and being really awkward and having the helmet on, right? It's that sense of who's looking at me.
Mm-hmm.
How am I
Yeah,
going to change in a way, right?
the
That's
little
like
baby deer that's coming out of the
that's
gate.
right, that's right. But you just remember you're doing it for yourself, for your family, for your future,
Mm-hmm.
not to anybody else. Somebody else is uncomfortable, it's because they're uncomfortable, not because you're doing something wrong.
That's awesome. I love that. Okay, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you want to say, address, express, put out there? Anything at all?
Not that I can think of, but you know the number if you want to get a hold of me.
Perfect. So we covered it all pretty much for this round. If anyone wants to learn more about what you've shared or get in touch with you or learn about your services, what's the best place to find those?
Well, you can look me up on Psychology Today in the Brentwood area, the Northern California Brentwood, not the OJ Brentwood. Um, and Donn Bradley, Donn Bradley, right? Just like it sounds. And you can also reach out to me at therapy with Donn, two N's at gmail.com if you'd like.
Perfect. And I'll put all of that information in the show notes. Do you do virtual or are you in person?
I do virtual, yes.
Okay, cool. So I'll
Yeah,
put all that.
obviously I'd rather do face to face because the
Right.
whole, you know,
Definitely. Okay, cool. I'll put all of that in the show notes and I really appreciate this. This was amazing. Thank you so
thanks,
much.
thanks, Catherine. It's nice talking with you.
You too.